Chapter 1 of The Bear Family at Home. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Katie Francesca. The Bear Family at Home by Curtis Wilbur. The Bear Family at Home and how the circus came to visit them. Once a little cub bear was caught in a big log trap and taken on a train to a circus. He lived in the circus a long, long while, and every day a great many people came to see the bear, and the lions, and the tigers, and the leopards, and the elephants, and the camels, and the other animals. Every night the animals would all be put and strange made for them. Then the wagons would be rolled on the flat cars of a railroad train. The train would go all night to another town, where a great many people would come to see the animals and the men and women in the circus. The cub bear saw a great many wonderful and strange things while he was in the circus, and while travelling on the trains. Once he crossed the ocean in a great ship and came back again in another ship. This story tells how the little cub bear got back into the woods again. One night, after the wagons and the animals had all been put on board the cars, the fireman rang the bell, and the engineer started the train, and away it went, whistling and coughing down the track. The animals were all night long going rattlety-bang, all night long, that they all went to sleep, and remained asleep a long while. While the animals and everyone on the train, except the engineer and the fireman, were asleep, the engineer looked ahead and suddenly saw a big rock on the track. He blew the whistle, toot toot, to call the brakeman, and the brakemen ran as fast as they could and began to put on the brakes to stop the train. But the train came nearer and nearer to the big rock. The poor engineer couldn't stop the train, and the brakemen couldn't stop the train. So the engine ran into the rock and was knocked off the track and turned a somersault and was smashed all to pieces. And all the cars ran off the track into a ditch, and the wagons were all broken, free, that all got out of their cages and found that they were free in the dark woods. They were all so glad to be free that they ran away as fast as they could and hid in the woods, all except the cub bear and a friend of his, a monkey named Jim. They ran a little way, and then the cub bear stopped and looked around. He saw a path. Then he looked at the trees and the mountain, and he thought he would wait there until morning. As soon as it was light, the cub bear looked way up on the mountainside and saw a cave. And where do you suppose they were? In the very same forest where the cub bear was born. They walked a little way, and the cub bear said, "Why, here is the path where little brother Jimmy Bear lost his foot in a trap." Very fast, off as fast as they could to the cave in the mountains. The cub bear's heart was beating very fast, pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat, because he knew that this was his old home, and he wondered whether his Papa Bear and Mamma Bear and his little Susie Bear and little brother Jimmy Bear were still there. They went in very quietly and found a great big brown bear asleep. When the big brown bear heard them come in, he jumped up quickly and looked at little cub bear, and little cub bear looked at him. It was the Papa Bear. He ran to the cub bear and put his arms around him and gave him a great bear hug. You know bears can hug awfully tight. Papa Bear hugged the cub bear, and the cub bear hugged the Papa Bear, and they were very, very glad to see each other. And they took the cub the Mamma Bear, and then the Mamma Bear gave the cub bear a great bear hug because she was so glad to see him. Susie Bear waked up and gave the little cub bear a big bear hug. But Jimmy Bear was not there. Did you ever give your papa a bear hug? After the papa bear and the mama bear had talked a little while to the cub bear, they said, "We have something to show you." And they took the cub bear away back into the back part of the cave and showed him the sweetest, cutest little baby bear you ever saw in your life. And the papa bear said, "We call this little baby bear Cub Bear now, so we will have to call you Circus Bear after this." For the little cub bear had told his papa and mama that he had been in the circus while away. All this time the monkey Jim was by himself in the cave, watching the big bears. They were so big and strong that he was frightened. So he climbed up to the top of the cave, and there he stayed until the little cub bear waked up, and the circus bear didn't know where he had gone. After a while, the little wee cub bear waked up and saw the monkey, and said, "Oh, see that funny little man up there on the root? He has hair all over him, and he has a long tail, and he is making faces at me." He asked the circus bear what it was, and the circus bear said, "It is a monkey named Jim, a very dear friend of mine. Would you like to shake hands with him?" And the little cub bear said, "Yes." So the circus bear told the monkey not to be afraid, and the monkey came down and shook hands with the little wee cub bear, and they said that he was the greatest. The very first thing this little cub bear did was to ask the monkey to tell him a story, for he was the greatest bear for stories you ever saw. He was always teasing his papa and his mama and everybody that came to the den to tell him a story. The monkey said, "All right, I will tell you a story about the time that I went to school." So that morning, when the papa and the mama bear and the circus bear and the little cub bear were sitting in the den, the monkey told his story. End of chapter 1. Recording by Katie Francesca. Chapter 2 of The Bear Family at Home. How the Monkey Went to School. Now, little cub bear, I am going to tell you about the time I went to school. The only time in my whole life that I went to school. The little cub bear said he had never been to school in his life, and he would like to hear the story. The monkey Jim said, "Well, one night when we were riding on the train, going from one town where the circus had been to another where they were going to give a show, I was riding in a wagon on one of the cars with a lot of other monkeys. The man who took care of the monkeys forgot and left a door open. A monkey named Joe and I climbed out through the open door and got on top of the wagon, and we just had a lot of fun, jumping around and playing with each other and pulling each other's hair. After we had played a long while, the train went into a covered bridge, and I said to Joe, "Let's jump up and see if we can catch hold of one of those iron rods." He said, "All right," and we gave a great jump, and we caught hold of an iron rod overhead. The train was going so fast that we almost missed the rod, but we hung on, and in a moment, when we looked down, what do you suppose had happened? The train had run out from under us, and there was nothing under us except the railway track and ties, and away down below them a deep, dark river. We were frightened, because it was very dark and very cold. We climbed down as fast as we could and walked across the ties until it was cold. There were a lot of trees near the track, and we ran over as quickly as we could and climbed a tree, but it was very, very cold. We hugged each other very tight and tried to keep warm. But it grew colder and colder and colder, until it seemed as though we would freeze. For you know we had always lived in a very warm country until we came to the circus. By and by, though, it commenced to get light, and when we looked over in the woods a little farther, we saw a little red schoolhouse. By and by, a man who took care of the little red schoolhouse came and opened the door and went inside. Pretty soon we saw the smoke coming out of the chimney, for the man had built a fire. Joe said to me, "Let's go down and run over there and see if we can get warm by the fire." So we climbed down the tree and ran as fast as we could to the little red schoolhouse. There we found a window open a little way, and we climbed up and went inside the schoolhouse. The man wasn't looking, so we hurried over near the stove, and Joe climbed into one desk where a boy kept his books, and I climbed into another desk where a girl kept her books. The man looked around quickly, for he thought he heard something, but we kept so quiet that he didn't see us. By and by he closed the window, went out and shut the door, and there we were, locked up in that little red schoolhouse. But the fire was so nice and warm that we were glad to be there. Pretty soon Joe said, "Let's go out and see if we can find something to eat." So we got out and looked all over the building. We opened the drawer in the teacher's desk, and in it we found an apple that he had taken away from a little boy in school the day before. For you know that little boys are not allowed to have apples in school. I gave Joe the biggest part of the apple, and we ate it all up. And just as we had eaten it up, a great big boy came to the door and made such a noise that we scampered back and got into the desks. We stayed there, very quietly. Pretty soon another boy came, and then another, and then another, and then a girl came, and by all the scholars had come. Some of them were playing in the yard, and some of them in the room, and just then the teacher came. He rang the bell. Ding dong to the schoolroom, ding dong, and the pupils came into the schoolroom and took their seats. Then the teacher struck a small bell, and the pupils sat up very straight and sang a song. Just then I reached out and grabbed the ear of the boy who was sitting in my seat and pulled it very hard. He screamed, "Ouch! Ouch!" And just then Joe reached out and pulled the hair of the girl that was sitting in his seat, and she screamed, "Ouch! Ouch!" The teacher pounded the desk and cried, "Order! Order!" The little boy thought it was the boy behind him that pulled his ear, and the little girl thought it was the girl behind her that pulled her hair. When everything was still again, the teachers told the boys and girls to take out their books. The boy reached in to get his finger, and he yelled, "Ouch!" just as loud as he could, and jumped out of his seat. And the little girl reached in to get her book, and Joe bit her finger, and she yelled, "Ouch!" just as loud as she could, and jumped out. All the pupils looked over to see what was the trouble, but we kept very still, and the teacher came down quickly to find out what caused the trouble. He reached his hand into the desk quickly, and I grabbed hold of his hand and hung on. Then he jerked his hand out, and I came out with it, and I jumped on his shoulders and began to pull his hair, and Joe jumped out of his desk, and he jumped on the teacher's shoulders, and the teacher yelled and tried to hit us with a stick. And we jumped over onto the teacher's desk, and then the boys' dinner pails' heads. I jumped out the window, and Joe ran out the door. And as he ran out, he took one of the boys' dinner pails with him. They all screamed and yelled and ran after us as fast as they could. We ran over to a tree, and a couple of dogs saw us, and they barked and ran after us. The boys threw stones, but none of them could hit us, and pretty soon we got to a tree. We scampered up as fast as we could, and all the pupils and the teacher and the dogs came to the foot of the tree, and the dogs barked, and the boys yelled and threw stones, and the girls danced and shouted. The teacher had something that looked like a gun, but I think it was only a stick, because he didn't shoot at all. Just then, Joe reached on top of his ball. He found a soft-boiled egg. He threw this down at the teacher and hit him right on top of his bald head. Then we scampered out on the branches and jumped into another tree, and then into another tree, and then into another tree, and pretty soon we had gone so far that they couldn't find us. Then we opened the dinner pail and we found a fine dinner. Some apples and nuts and bread and butter and a piece of pie. When we had eaten everything there was in the pail, we left the pail up in the tree and climbed down to the ground. Then we walked and we ran until we came to a town, and there was the circus tent, for this was the very town where the circus was going to show. We ran as fast as we could, and a lot of dogs got after us. Joe ran, but we got away from all the dogs but one, because he could run faster than the others. He was a very little dog, and when he came close to us, Joe ran to one side of the road and I ran to the other, and just as he got between us, we grabbed the dog by his tail and his ears and pulled so hard that he just yelled, "Kiki! Kiki! Kiki!" and ran toward the tent as fast as he could. So we both jumped on his back and rode until we came to the tent. Then we jumped off and scampered into the tent under the canvas and found our wagon. The door was still open, and we got into the wagon, and there we went to sleep, for we had been up all night. "That is why I went to school," said the monkey. And the little bear cub said, "I went to school. I'm big enough to go to school." End of chapter 2. Recording by Katie Francesca.